So Dave, the first thing I actually want to do is thank you for taking the invitation to come here on such short notice. Unfortunately, Vinny is a little bit sick at the moment, so you are a top man for coming in and covering for him. Now, don't get me wrong, you were on my short list anyway, because there is a couple of questions I do want to ask you specifically about your background, who you are, and how you came to be where you are. So most people probably know you for your fighting background, so I want to start there. I know you started at a young age, but how did you get into Thai boxing?
Process of elimination, mainly. I tried a lot of sports when I was a kid, or was forced to try a lot of sports when I was a kid. And I liked fighting. You know, I was one of them like little boys that like pretended every stick was a sword and, you know, watched Dragon Ball Z at all hours of the night. And I was one of these, but I was also like a little fat chubby kid who didn't really do a lot of physical activity. So it was only natural. My parents were like, Jesus Christ, we got to get him out of the house. And they put me in everything. They were like, okay, we'll try hurling, ga, taekwondo at one point, and none of it stuck because I just hated it. Like, you know, I just thought it was pointless or useless. Like, but then I was into WWE at the time, so that was like, you know, fucking fake.
Who's your favorite wrestler?
Oh, it's two. It's Shawn Michaels and Triple H in DX.
D-Generation X.
D-Generation X.
How many kids did you super kick on the playground? Sweet chin music.
More than I've kicked in Thai boxing, probably, but yeah.
So when you mentioned there, like there was a lot of, what's the word, encouragement from your parents, primarily your dad, wanted to get you active?
Yeah, I'd say so, yeah.
He's been a big supporter of the Thai boxing though.
Yeah, well, he's just, he's just a big supporter of anything that propels me forward in life in general. So, I mean, the fact that I had chosen that myself was like, yes, son, go, learn this thing. Yeah, like I said, I wasn't really into anything. And then, but I was into the WWE, played all the games, you know, fucking countless hours on that. And I remember once he said to me, he was like, you know, that stuff's not real, right? And I was like, oh, no. You know, obviously the emotions bubbling up as a kid is like, what do you mean it's not real? And he's like, let me show you something real. So he was into UFC at the time. He was watching like the old footage, and he showed me, I think it was Shogun Rua versus Lyoto Machida 2, where Shogun Rua knocked Lyoto Machida out. And that was kind of the first time that I had seen in like sports settings someone getting KO'd stiff, and I was like, whoa, that's like everything that my little boy DNA is calling for. So I'd say within a few months, obviously I'd become a fan since then. I was watching all the fights with him. And then I had started kind of inquiring about like if there were any like MMA clubs around the place. And there was, what was it, Team Rhino in Baldoyle at the time.
Oh yeah, I know it. Yeah, I do know it.
So that was my humble beginnings in Team Rhino.
And then you eventually moved across to Dublin Thai boxing.
Yeah, so the transition there was I kind of always took to the striking a little bit more than I did to the grappling. Now, not to say that I wasn't a bad grappler. I just, you know, when it went to grappling, it was like a little mental, like, oh, fuck's sake. You know, like.
You and I had a conversation before. What age were you when you had your first fight? You were very young, if I remember.
Yeah, 14. I had my first 2 fights. They were on the same day.
And I believe you said you thought, this is it. This is how I'm going to get the girls.
I mean, isn't that what every little boy thinks? Yeah, safe to say that didn't fucking happen.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, you did what... I'm actually a massive advocate for that. I really like that your dad encouraged you to take up something physical. Yeah. And I think most people that know you will be shocked to know you're, what are you now? You're 24 years old.
24, yeah. So.
But you're a man, you know?
A man.
Chad, Dave. But like, that's it. And rolling on, you've been with Dublin Thai boxing now for a while. And I know you went from being a young guy there, fighting in the low 70 kilo range, to now you're one of their most experienced and accomplished fighters.
Yeah, I'd say so. You got it in a nutshell.
Well, I've seen the clips. Like I've seen the condition you guys do. I've seen the guys hitting the pads. I mentioned to you recently there was one of your lighter lifters was like kicking or punching the pads, and I've done a bit of pad work with you, and I could not believe the speed of the guy.
Yeah,
you know, it's such a different beast to what like even what I've been exposed to. So that's very interesting. How did you find? So you've obviously come on and working now in a commercial gym. You're a personal trainer. You at some stage you started weight training along with your combat training.
Yeah.
What was that? I assume you were combat training first.
Absolutely, yeah. I'd say it was predominantly combat training up until maybe when I started actually studying to be a personal trainer. So,
and what was it like for you to incorporate, you know, resistance training and specific, I should say non-specific cardio training into your routine? So for what I mean is like naturally, if you were obviously a high level fighter already, you were obviously quite skilled, but then you added in this non-specific training to make yourself stronger, more robust, more capable. What was the effects of that? I know this goes somewhere later on, we'll take it to, but I really want to know what the first couple of months were like introducing resistance training into your combat training.
To be honest, it felt like, did you ever play like an RPG?
Yeah.
And you'd be like grinding and leveling up your character. It felt like leveling up. It felt like hitting that like, you know, that big like level up. I was
plus
like, yes,
5 strength.
100%, yeah. Literally. Like I'd figured something out. And I was always kind of very like internally focused on the whole process because not all of my fights were like super good performances. Like I'd say it was like 50-50 at one point where I'd go in and I'd feel amazing, and then other times I'd feel like the worst performance of my life, and I was like, what am I doing wrong? And I was always like very self-critical on that. And introducing strength training was like, yes, another piece of the puzzle I've been missing this whole time. So I was able to fit it in there quite nicely.
And I know, so essentially your whole life, your whole adult life, you've been in some kind of competitive outlet. You've had something to train towards, whether it's a fight or a training camp. You've been consistently training for probably the last 10 years, I think I'm correct to say. So naturally when COVID came, there was no fights.
No.
Because people can't fight each other 2 meters apart. So you took the plunge into powerlifting.
Yes, I did. That was fun.
Tell me all about it.
Well, I mean, I always kind of refer to it as like my holiday sport, because at the time I was still like shadowboxing, practicing my skills in whatever capacity I could. And I was still doing like hard conditioning sessions and like body weight strength, whatever equipment I kind of had around the house. But I mean, it always just kind of turned really into conditioning sessions anyway, just because, right, I don't have the weights, so I'll just, do what's there. And I think it was Mario who or it was yourself first. It was before the new year. What was it? The new year of
2020.
2020, yeah. Where you had offered me to come and train into your house.
Yeah.
So I was using the equipment there, kind of getting used to, incorporating strength training, just my own kind of like program and nothing really crazy. And then as the lockdowns went in and we were kind of getting into the swing of that, that's when Mario texted me and he was like, oh, what are you doing for training? And I was like, none. I was just going to, do some squats in the living room, to be honest. Why? What do you have in mind? And he's like, oh, I have the equipment in my house. If you wanted to come down, we could, train together and do some, like, get some going. And I was like, okay, that sounds good. Because I have nothing else to do. Like, obviously, fucking entire country's closed. So I was like, yeah, something to do. Deadly. Yeah,
and you went through quite the transformation as an athlete.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was fighting at 73 kg in the 2 fights prior to starting the powerlifting training. I'd gained a little bit of weight, obviously, because the lockdowns were in and out in the 9 months leading up to it. So I was putting on a little bit, but I was still like the output and the activity was still high enough where I was maintaining some semblance of my old weight. Like, and then I hit powerlifting and I was like, yeah, baby.
Domino's pizza.
Domino's pizza every Saturday night. That was the happiest fucking 4 months of my relationship with Maeve and my relationship with food and training and that I've ever thought so.
That was my favorite thing when you were like, I'm powerlifting, babe. She's like, oh, are we getting food? You're like, pizza. And she's like, really?
Really? But you're training tomorrow. I was like, exactly.
Yeah, you became a fat bastard real quick.
Yeah. In fairness, like it just kind of hit me because when I was actually in the peak of the powerlifting training, I was doing 4 sessions. What was it, like the squat, bench, deadlift, and then the bullshit day?
Yeah. I love how everybody knows it as the bullshit day.
Yeah, it's the bullshit day, yeah. I mean, it felt like bullshit,
well,
to be honest.
The PC is the fluff day.
The fluff day.
If you're going to skip one, skip that day 3 or whatever it was.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was never skipped, to be honest, so. Was that me?
Yeah, it's your GPS to get you back on track with the story after you put your phone on silent.
Turn left in 0 meters.
Yeah, you're here already, baby. But look, that does kind of bring me back to the point. So not only did you start a complete new form of training, you also signed up then to compete at Ab Series.
Yes.
Talk me through that, because that must have been a completely different experience to any kind of competition you've been in before.
Yeah, well, at that point, there was 9 months without competition. And I'd started to rack up a little bit of a good run with the fights anyway. Like I had a win in Belfast the November before 2020. And then I had a fight in March. I didn't win that fight, but it was still a good performance. Like I was still on B class, still felt good. Obviously, I had the things in my head that I needed to improve. And then literally like that week, the country locked down. So I managed to get one fight in, just slipped it in. And the country locked down. And I was like, well, shit, back to square one.
Yeah, I think it hit everybody pretty hard, like, because it came out of nowhere. Remember, it was that, like, it's going to be 2 weeks. But then it was fair bit longer.
Yeah.
But again, it was a very unpredictable time. But I love that you found something productive to do, and you grew not only as an athlete, but it helped you a lot as a coach. So again, you went from a super high level of conditioning where you're extremely lean most of the time, visible abs, lighter weight, very seriously monitoring your food intake. A lot of your training would be long sessions, high repetitions, whether it's shadowboxing, strikes, pad work. And I know your coach had you do a lot of conditioning work. I've seen the videos of you doing burpees and things like that, which looks terrible and awful to me, but I do respect it. To the complete other side, where you were prepping for a powerlifting meet, especially when you get close to that, your training sessions may be long, but you're talking very low numbers of reps and extremely high weight. So we get to Ab Series, you've weighed in, you're in the back. I know you competed alongside Sean O'Malley. So what's going through your head? You're standing there in this singlet with these knees. You did sleeves, yeah?
Sleeves, yeah.
Like, what's going through your head during all this?
I don't know. It was kind of surreal, to be honest, because it didn't feel like I was competing until obviously I'd gone out and did the first lift. But up until then, it was like, it was still a super intense environment, as fights are. Like anyone who's been to a fight knows that there's this like buzz and energy, and it had the same resemblance to that. So I was like, okay, cool, yeah, I'm in where I'm supposed to be, and I've trained hard, so I've still put in preparation like I would for a fight. I missed the competition element of it, to be honest, and there was nothing available to me at that time for fights. So I was like, oh well, I'm probably never gonna get an opportunity like this again, because the fights aren't available. So I was like, let me branch off into something else and see what to do. So I was there, went out for the first lift, and then obviously had my little... You
got headbutted by the bar.
Yeah, I tried.
It's almost like you had to get a smack to take it as a competition. You were, I'm in it now.
Yeah, well, that's how it went, certainly. Like, I think I had a good competition post-smack.
Yes.
So
for those watching, on Dave's opening attempt on his squat, so the squat's always the first move in a full powerlifting competition, he rolled the bar over the top of his head and it hit the floor. So he went down for the squat and it just went straight over his head, left a little graze. And I don't know how you didn't get knocked out.
I don't know. It was like combination of like adrenaline and it was a conscious effort, to be honest. Like I didn't mean for it to hit my head, but I did mean to push it off my back because I felt it sliding.
Right.
So I didn't, obviously you watch all these videos of gym fails and I was like, I'm not going to be the fella that's pinned under a bar. So I felt it shifting up my back, and I was like, oh, fuck, I gotta ditch this like now, or it's going to take me down with it. So what I did was I essentially just shoulder pressed it off as hard as I could. And that's why the spotters kind of couldn't catch the bar, because it was very sudden. I just went and tossed it. But Big Joe, the fella who
pulled you out from underneath.
So like as it hit me, he reefed me up like, and that's why it looked very.
It was very funny because he
dramatic.
was just like cradling you in his arms. It was like,
yeah, I have the slow-mo of him like holding my well-developed chest over the last few months.
What was on that bar? It was like 155 or something, wasn't it?
It wasn't a lot. Like it was 162.5 or something like that.
That is a lot of weight to take a smack in the back of the head with.
Yeah. I think we had fucked up the opener, to be honest, because we were meant to open up at like 150 or something like that.
What I like though is that when you walked out for your second attempt, everyone was like,
yeah,
and there was just that like collective sigh of relief.
Yeah.
Jesus, he's not a complete idiot. He's not good. We're not going to have to call an ambulance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then the 172.5 moved well as well. Like that's one thing I look back at is obviously I didn't have any experience with any of it.
Yeah.
So I was just happy to get the training personal best in there, you know.
For sure, man. I was impressed that you even threw yourself into it as much as you did. Because naturally it's a completely different style of training. It's an investment to get all the equipment necessary to take part to a decent level, and you put on a fairly respectable performance. So the whole day, bench went well, deadlift went well. You're happy with everything?
Yeah, the bench press was probably the unspoken about like little thing. 120 was the like PB in training, but 115 was all I managed to do because I hit 120, but I don't know what happened. I was told that I like went a little flat instead of, obviously doing the natural arch. And I hit the halfway point, and I seen the spotters go to reach for the bar. And I was like, don't fucking touch it for what felt like 8 seconds. And eventually they were like, no, it's not going anywhere. So they had to lift it off me. Like,
yeah, they do have to do that. It's in the rule book if it's not moving after a certain amount of time. But like, that's a big lesson. I'm sure you know that from your combat sports, is that all the best laid training could still not mean a shit when you get to the day. And I think that's a big thing in powerlifting. It's very rare you're going to have a day like you do at a powerlifting meet where you're going to do 3 heavy squats, 3 heavy bench, and 3 heavy deadlift over the course of like 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah.
So it is quite a different beast to what a training session is. But do you think you'd ever try powerlifting again?
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, I probably not for a while. I'd like to focus kind of on the fighting for the next however long I have. If the career goes good, then maybe hopefully another decade, because normally fighters peak around mid to late 30s, and then they have a fall off just because they can't recover the same way. And the young fellas obviously have that fucking edge. But yeah, I mean, after my mid 30s, there's still a good portion of my life where I'll have open, and I'm like, yeah, powerlifting could be a nice little thing to transition to.
For sure. And I think with the knowledge base you're building by working in a commercial gym, and most of the clients, I think it's fair to say that you'll train are going to be some combination of the people that come to you for pad work, like myself, but you've got a good portion of people like your client Maria and things like that do quite a bit of barbell work. Yeah. And they're obviously quite proficient, which means that you do have a good base of understanding there. So I think a future in powerlifting is definitely there if you want it. But what I'd selfishly, I would love to see you compete again, like, not in 10 years. Like you go on a sabbatical from fighting or something like that for like a year and just decide to powerlift.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. It's a possibility. Like,
I think you could be, I don't think you need to, if you were to do it again, I don't think you need to bulk the same way you did.
No, definitely not.
I think you could compete quite competitively as an 83 or a 93, be it at an AB series or an Irish Powerlifting Federation. But that rolls us on very nicely, because I know we've spoken before in like off mic, about your experience and building up that massive base of strength and becoming really powerful. And you could feel the difference in your strikes and how you weathered strikes when you went back to Thai boxing. Yeah. So talk me through that experience. So the lockdowns are finished, you're back training, you're back getting hit by people and smacking people. Talk me through that difference you had from after building up those months and months and months of that massive strength base.
Yeah, well, like I said, in the lead up to the actual powerlifting competition, I'd never stopped training the mobility and the skills in some capacity. Like I was doing three sessions of each a week, along with the strength training. So I maintained a lot of the skills through that. And when I got back, I've heard this quote. I don't know where it is. It's probably floating on one of them like fitness fucking meme websites or something. But like it said like the more force you can produce, the more force you can absorb, something like that. And I was like, and I went into the first Muay Thai training session, and I went in, and the lads looked at me and they were like, what the fuck? Like the size of me was obviously a lot different. I had a previous balloon up of weight like that. It was after, my first relationship, obviously, a sabbatical from training, and I came back 100 kilo. Not a good 100 kilo, I should mention. Yeah. But this one, I'd still had a lot of my tone from the powerlifting training. I was still training it to some extent. So I was still kind of big and I still had some of the size on. I went in and they were like, fuck, you got big. And I was like, yeah, I did. So we went into the sparring, and immediately like shots that would have like hurt or moved me, or like they were just like bouncing off me. It was like some weird armor that I had. And I was like, damn. And then I went to throw my own shots, and I was like, I could just feel this like extra acceleration at the end. You know, the way like, I guess for the months of powerlifting, everything's about the lockout, like commitment, drive through and all that. And I felt that through the techniques as well. I could feel them land with weight. And I was like, I've never felt anything land with weight as effortlessly as it did. Like before, it was always like, yeah, if something landed with weight, I put 100% in there. But when I returned there, it was like I was throwing shots and they were just like default strong. And I was like, shit, this is pretty cool.
Yeah, because that definitely showed in your most recent fight.
Yeah.
So I know you had the whole saga of cutting back down to your competitive weight, 74?
78 was
78.
Yeah.
So you went from, what was it, like you were like 102 or 101 at the comp or something like that?
Yeah, so I started, what was it? It was 99.5 I weighed in.
And then you cut all the way down to 78.
And I cut all the way down to 78. I was actually heavier because I'd caught COVID on the January at the start of that year before I went back into fight preparation. And I gained a little bit of weight, obviously, and I wasn't training. All I was doing was just like walking around waiting for this cold to shake off. Like, and I remember stepping on the scale and I was like 100 or 101 or something like that. And I was like, shit, I got a long way to go. It was like 23 kg or something like that. And
it's like a whole quarter of who you
are. It was literally like taking off a quarter of my personally. And it felt like that as well at some points. But I think the fact that I had such a good lean mass buildup, and I was also eating at like the max amount of calories that I could have been eating and sustaining at the time, it was a lot easier to cut the first 10 kg came off just, as a rule, like, and then it was the next 10 after that. That was a little tougher.
So your most recent fight, was that Cork or Limerick?
That was Limerick.
Limerick. And when was it, April?
That was June.
Close enough.
Yeah, June.
Because I know Evan and Chloe went down and Mario went down.
Yeah, Evan, Chloe, and Mario all drove down.
So I watched the fight on YouTube.
Yeah.
And no disrespect to the guy you fought, because I know he was giving his all.
Yeah.
But it's mad to watch because he's hitting you with everything he has and you're just not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And every time, the amount of times you just knocked him on his ass.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could you feel that when you were in there?
Yes. Yeah. Like, I was nervous going into that fight. I was very, very nervous. Excited, obviously, as well. Like, I had enough fights to know that the feelings were normal. But this fella that I was going in against, he had won against two previous opponents that I'd had. One had knocked me down, and the other had knocked me out. My only times that I was ever actually knocked down in a fight. he won against these two fellas. So that kind of played on my mind a little bit going in. I was like, shit, he's fucking tough. Like, and then watching his last few fights, I could see he was strong. He was scrappy. He was like everything that I had had problems with before. You know, he was durable. He turned fights messy. He had a great fucking gas tank as well. So he could keep up that like pressure throughout the 5 rounds. And I was kind of shocked, to be honest, because I had it in my mind that I was staying there for 5 rounds. Like, that was my mentality. I am not leaving here without the win. I'm staying here for 5 rounds, and I'm going to fight him as hard as I can. But it didn't go 5 rounds, so.
Well, I think you finished it at round 2, was it?
2, yeah. So I gave him the 8 count with hooks over the ear.
Yeah.
And then I was working the left kick for the whole fight. And it finally just snuck in underneath one of his elbows, and I'd actually nodded to him because I knew it landed very well. It was a little bit of a delay, and then he just went down. Like anyone who's been hit in the liver before knows that it's not on the point of impact. There's normally like a second or two, and then as you go to take your breath in, you can't. Like everything just locks up, and your breath's gone.
You can see it in the register of that pain. Like, that's what I mean, because naturally, unfortunately, I couldn't go. But watching it, I knew you were going to have something a little extra from before, after all that strength work. I didn't know how it was going to manifest, though. So that was crazy to see. And it was very, very impressive. And my favorite part of the whole thing is, like, naturally, it was probably in your head somewhat leading up to the fight. This guy had beaten people that had already beaten you. And then to have, I don't want to say it was an easy fight. I wasn't there. I'm not going to disrespect that guy. He's obviously a class fighter, but it was a lot less difficult than you thought it was going to be. So imagine there was a massive amount of relief in that. And then it turned out the guy was really sound and he bought you a point.
Yeah, super sound. Yeah, Stephen, shout out to him. I know this.
No, for real. Shout out to him.
Podcast probably isn't going anywhere, but 100% he is a really nice guy. Kind of the lead up to it, I was a little bit taken aback because I'd never really had any kind of like back and forth on social media with any of my opponents, and he was like super nice from the beginning. Like, I remember he posted when we first got matched, he was like, "Oh, matched against a super experienced guy. Really enjoyed watching him, you know, coming up, and very excited to fight Dave and all this stuff." And I was like, man, it's kind of weird because like you create an enemy in your head if you have no contact with them. But the fact that he was so friendly, I was like, it's harder to like try and create the enemy in your head a little bit. So,
well, the last thing I really want to ask you about now, and it comes from that, because I know you've said that, like, you're in the ring, you fight somebody, and you mentioned, no, if you don't know anything else about them, you turn them into an enemy in your head. But you've mentioned that after the fight, there's just this connection between you, because you've, you know, been knocking 7 stages of shit out of each other for however many rounds. Like, so psychologically, it builds that camaraderie, I suppose I can jump to say, because, you know, regardless to the fact that you actually have to fight each other, you're combat fighter, you're warriors in a modern society that I think we both know and we can both see to some degree is quite soft. So, like, I would consider you quite a hardy person, quite a well put together and grounded guy. And I'd imagine you have a certain kinship with other fighters and athletes and things like that in a similar mindset.
I do, especially the athletes that I train with in my gym. Like, there is, like, like, no one ever walks in and they don't know where they are. Like, everyone knows where they are in the gym, and it's kind of like it. Everyone sits comfortably with that, you know. Like, and there isn't a lot of, like, there is egos obviously, because everyone who wants to fight for glory is in some way feeding their own ego. But like, no one has any, you know, egos past the fact that, like, we all know where our level is. We know where we are in comparisons to each other. And we know that we're a team at the end of the day as well. Like, we're not fighting each other. We're simulating fighting each other so that we could eventually fight someone else. So that, but yeah, there is like some weird like brotherhood type thing. Like, I no doubt if I had fought any of my opponents, 100% I could probably go for a night out with them and have a pint with them.
It's crazy how quickly you can form that bond with somebody that you've just tried to beat the shit out of.
Yeah,
it's very impressive.
it's instant. Yeah, like as soon as the third round bell rings, it's like smiles just break out on both faces. And partially it's because, oh, thank fuck the fight's over. Like there was a little element of that, especially if it's tough fights. Like, and another thing is like, man, we fucking wailed on each other. That was pretty good, wasn't it?
So the last question I want to ask you, and we'll wrap everything up here, is, so you're working now with the general public in Fly Fit Gym and Swords. You've become one of our most experienced trainers. You're flying, you're doing fantastically. I know you're working closely with Mario Morelli of Motion Masters to promote your product. So your scope of the people you work with has gotten wider and wider.
Yeah.
And specifically just for somebody like you, as I've mentioned before, like Dave's only 24 years old and he has this manly husky voice and he owns the room when he comes in. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that you do put yourself through fairly like hardship, you know, to step in any kind of ring or whatever it might be and acknowledge that you're now consenting to this person attacking you for the next couple of rounds, I think takes a serious amount of balls, right? So I think that gives you some perspective. You have a very good awareness of where you are if you've been outmatched or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So my question is, do you think in 2022 or whenever people listen to this, do you think, can you relate to people your own age a lot of the time? Like you're 24 years old, you're doing really well, you're running your own business, you're a high level fighter. Do you think there's a little bit of a disconnect, especially for younger men nowadays? Like I know with a lot of the young guys I work with, when they get into the gym, they really love it because it gives them some kind of meaning or guidance or something that they can take accountability for. Like take the young guys you coach in your club or that aspire to be like you and comparing them even to the young guys. We all see there's like 8 kids around a pec deck for like 40 minutes.
Yeah.
Like what in your own observations, what would you say to that very long-winded question?
What was the question again?
Do you think your combat background and how grounded that makes you and how much it makes you aware yourself, do you think do you find it harder to relate to people your own age, or do you think that people your own age sometimes are directionless? Or I suppose given the scope of the people you know, do you think you're lucky to be surrounded by that core group of athletes that are, I suppose, I'm moving in the right direction?
No, I don't really find it too hard to relate. Like I don't know. I in personal training, in the realm of personal training, one thing I've had to learn, especially working with a large scope of people, is if you're going to have any kind of success in sticking with them long term, you have to find at least one level on which you relate.
Commonality.
Yeah, otherwise it's there's always going to be this weird, like, you're one step behind or they're one step forward. Like it's just the sync is off. Like, in terms of like the fellas around my age, like most of the fellas I know, no, not really. Like you say, you know, obviously the things I've experienced, like I haven't had a hard life by any stretch of the imagination, but I found out from a young age that hardship grows you in a sense, you know? And especially growing up and watching like the UFC and all this, like I always loved the stories most where it's like people had it the worst. Like they came from nothing and they fought up and they, you know, they gave themselves everything. Like those were the best stories. And it kind of irked me as well in a sense because I never had one of those stories, you know, like I didn't have a hard life. And I was like, shit, is that like a necessary ingredient to be as successful as they were? Is that necessity for hardship? And I found out from a young age is that you can put the hardship on yourself as well at the same time, and it will grow you in the same way. Maybe, you know, like maybe not to the same extent, but I did find out that if you put the pressure and the heat on you, you will grow. You know, so
I would actually argue that voluntary hardship is probably much more difficult to embrace than hardship you've no choice but to go through.
Yeah.
You've all, like you mentioned, if you don't think you've had a particularly hard life, comfort is always just there. But you've chosen throughout your young life over the last 10 years to consistently put yourself in positions that are very, very uncomfortable, very challenging, and in many ways dangerous because people are hitting you in the face. And that has definitely produced a very well-rounded personal trainer, athlete, and combat athlete, coach, and trainer. So, Dave, there's so much more we could talk about. We didn't even touch off really your step into personal training. We didn't really get to talk about how you've developed in FlyFit. We never got into the backstory of Dave the Rave. Or
It's not that much of a backstory, to be honest.
I've seen those pictures of you snowboarding at some party or something like that up in the Alps, is it?
Yeah. I guess it's unrelated, the Dave the Rave, the nickname, and the fact that I actually did used to have a little, used to like to go out and party.
I think we'll get into it next time.
Cool.
Thanks very much for coming on, man.
Thank you so much. No worries.
Cheers.